Hey everyone, welcome back to So Who Are You Really? Real Life Spirituality. Again, I am joined by the hosts Bryan and Jody. If you've not connected with them, please do so. They are amazing people. Now, in previous episodes, we talked about what spirituality is. We also talked about spirituality as part of the human experience. If you haven't heard those, go on back and check those out. But we want to actually talk about, we want to get real, we want to get practical. How you practice spirituality in your life. And I'm going to start by asking Bryan, how do you practice spirituality in your daily life?
Well, I think that there's a lot of different ways to answer this question. But there are like the basic things that are not, especially in our time now, that they're not very mysterious. There's certain things that, there's certain practices that people follow. And you could practice one, practice all of them, it doesn't really matter. But there's meditation, there's prayer, there's study. But I think it really comes down to presence. Right. There's a book, and I forgot the name of the book now. It's like Practicing the Presence of God. And it's by a monk. And I'm looking at the book right now, but I can't reach up and grab it. I can't remember the name of the book. I'd love to put it in if we have like some type of a way to
we'll
give information.
Yeah.
But it's by a guy who's a monk, and he talks about going through like his day. And I think at one point he's in the kitchen, like chopping up vegetables. There's another point he's like sweeping the floor. And he talks about how these are all like him practicing the presence of God, like him just being really, really present with what he's doing at that moment. I think that we can talk about meditation and different ways of meditating, prayer and different ways of praying. We can talk about different books that will point you in a direction. We could talk about journaling and self-contemplation. We could talk about those things, but I think in the end of the day, it really has to do with just being very present with what you're doing and who you're being in this very moment. I think that's the essence of spiritual practice, I think.
And I'll just highlight what Bryan's talking about. Rather, another word to use is the now moment. Rather than just being present, what are you doing in this now moment? There is no past, there is no future, there just is now. And when you're in this now moment, it's recognizing what you're saying, what you're doing, and how you're feeling. And those three things, when you're in this now moment, allows you to be in a now moment. And to be in the now moment is to recognize that you are the highest form of God's creation. And when you're the highest form of God's creation, you're love, you're pure love in this now moment. And so recognizing you are love is just such a powerful statement. So spiritual practice is the now moment. And I agree with Bryan. There are other practices, meditation, breathing, grounding, being in water, being in the shower, being in the ocean, in the lakes and the rivers, because part of who we are is water. So when we're in or near water, we're in the presence of creation. And so that's what I would like to add.
I appreciate hearing that because, I think I've mentioned you guys before. For me, I feel closest to God when I'm around water, particularly oceans, and just having that connection. And now I understand I'm not just crazy.
Well, Chris, you are crazy.
Well, that's true.
That's the
two are
problem.
not mutually exclusive.
Yeah. So kidding, of course. What came up for me as I was listening to Jody talk was like maybe for we'll say Kobe Bryant, right? Maybe for him playing in a game or practicing, right, and really being engaged, and then those moments where athletes talk about going into the zone. Right. Maybe we can also look at that and say, well, they're having a spiritual moment there. Right. Where they're super connected to what is happening at that moment. They talk about time slowing down in those moments. They talk about, for basketball players, the basket is the size of the ocean and that everything is effortless. Right. Or for whatever sport, or even I'm sure some people in the negotiating process, maybe someone who's in business and they're in the negotiating process. There's a moment where they feel like they're in that very present zone. Maybe that's a spiritual moment that they're having. Right. Not maybe, if we use the terms that we are using, like, having a human experience and being aware that they are having a spiritual moment, since we are spirit.
I think I've heard the term flow thrown around where people will say I'm in creative flow or I'm in flow where time just slows down and things just come. I mean, it's effortless. I mean, I've experienced that a few times when I've had a creative idea and it just starts spilling out of me. And I'll even go back and say, I'm not really sure I wrote that. I think I was just writing it down, So I'm sure everyone has had a similar moment. We just don't always categorize it as that.
Right. I'd be curious about what you're curious about now, Chris, as you hear us talking. And I'd be also curious to know, like, what doesn't sound, what doesn't resonate for you?
So I think for me, again, talking about spiritual practices, you rattled off a lot of things. And again, these are things that we hear certainly in the networking community, the business community, meditation and spiritual practice. And, I've all the time told people, get outside, take a hike, go to the ocean, do something to see that creation, because that does inspire things. But I think, again, people, if they're afraid of the word spiritual, then they're like, oh, am I doing something wrong? But I think I want them to understand is all of those ways, they're good for you, regardless of if it's spiritual or it's just if you want to think of it as a professional development thing. Taking that time to get in touch with, I guess, your mind. I mean, when you mention present, we hear people, oh, you need to be in the present moment. But I liked how you phrased it, then the now. And here's a case in point. I went out the other day hiking. I ended up making video after video, things that I wanted to do, marketing videos and all that. The last video I made was me talking about this idea of being present and how I had hiked 3/4 of this trail and had done nothing but recorded videos. And that now I'm going to turn off the camera and try to enjoy the last quarter of it, just really listening to the sounds and getting in my mind. Have any of you ever experienced, I call it like mental diarrhea. Like you go out and your mind is just racing. It's just all these conversations and everything in your head. And you go out with the purpose of trying to create something, but it's just like your mind has to unload all these conversations, some of them real, some of them imaginary. It just wants to chatter. I guess the monkey chatter is something I've heard before. Is that something you've experienced, or is it, again, I'm going back to me being crazy?
Yeah, I think you're describing schizophrenia, Chris.
Oh, great, thank you.
I would have someone, I would talk to someone about that. My other self
was telling me that the other day.
No, but to some degree, it's funny. But to some degree, we're all kind of schizophrenic. I was listening to Eckhart Tolle, the book A New Earth, and he was talking about how he saw this woman on the subway and how she was just kind of rattling off and just kind of being, we've all been on the subway, if we've been on a subway or been somewhere with someone who seems a bit unhinged and they're just kind of talking to themselves and just kind of chatter. And at first he was kind of just watching her and listening to her, and he got really, really curious. I think he even followed her for a little while. And then he came to realize that what she's exhibiting is what we are all kind of exhibiting to some degree, like just having this conversation that kind of goes in wild places and wild ways, and like all that. Some way, this person's crazy and unhinged. But then if we really look at it, it's like, I do that same thing. I have something in me that does that. That just does this like chattering thing, right? Some thoughts feel good, some thoughts feel bad, some thoughts feel coherent, some feel uncoherent. It's just the mind. It's the mind doing what the mind does, and it doesn't make you a crazy person.
So we continue the conversation of a human having a spiritual experience. It's outside of us. Change the perspective and say, I am a spirit having a human experience. So I am the one observing the thoughts. I'm the one observing the feelings. I am the awareness, rather than I am this emotion or I am this thought. I'm the one observing it.
I like that. So really, I mean, going back to what you were saying, Bryan, it's really, we all have that chatter. It's just some of us vocalize it and some of us don't. And if you're somebody that vocalizes it, I just recommend putting an AirPod in your ear. Nobody will know the difference.
Yeah. Sometimes I walk around with ear. I talk to myself sometimes. I walk around and I put earpods in so I don't look like I'm unhinged.
It gives us freedom now. We can do it.
Yeah. And I love what Jody's saying here, because it's an experience. Because I think some people think that that's who they are. That train of thought, like, wow, am I crazy? I'm thinking all these crazy things. Am I crazy? And some people really associate themselves as being that voice. But once we realize there's an opportunity for us to step back and to observe it, we realize that it's not us, that we are the observer of this voice. And that's awareness.
All right. We've talked about spiritual practices and, the normal ones that people think of, but now we also understand that sometimes just even having that conversation with ourselves in our head is all part of that spiritual and that human experience, and that we should learn to embrace it. Right, Jody?
Yes.
And what I want to add really quickly before we jump off, I think this is an important point, is that it's practice. It's a practice. Like Jody and I are talking about it, but we're talking about it because it was something we're still practicing. It's not like we've become enlightened, these enlightened masters that have surpassed the realm of thought. It's practice. Like when you first practice a sport, it takes a while for you to get it, right? And you never quite master it, or maybe you do. I don't know, but it's a practice. So the first time someone sits down to meditate and they can't be present, they think, oh, I can't do this, but it's a practice.
It is.
So I just wanted to highlight that.
Absolutely. So we would love to hear what you all do for as part of your spiritual practices. Maybe it's something we haven't thought of, or, let us know. Let us know what you do in your spiritual practice and how that works for you. And obviously, if you have any questions about anything discussed here, feel free to reach out to us. Again, connect with Bryan, connect with Jody. Just reach out, ask those questions, and maybe we can address them in a future episode. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Bryan, Jody. It was great. And you guys have a great day.
Thanks, Chris.
Have a great day. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Jody.